Hello, my name is Chloe Sievert, and I will be giving my presentation on tetanus. In 2017, a 6-year-old boy who had received no immunization sustained a forehead laceration while playing outdoors on a farm. The wound was cleaned and sutured at home. 6 days later, he had episodes of crying, jaw clenching, and involuntary upper extremity muscle spasms, followed by arching of the neck and back, and generalized spasticity. Later that day, at the onset of breathing difficulty, the parents contacted emergency medical services. Doctors believed that he was infected with Clostridium tetani. Clostridium tetani, also known as tetanus or lockjaw, is a gram-positive bacillus bacteria. It is an obligated anaerobe, which means that they typically remain as spores in the soil, but once they enter an environment without oxygen, they can develop into fully fledged Clostridia. The big signs that doctors look out for are muscle spasms or stiffness in the neck. To see if a patient is infected with tetanus, since there isn't a regulated lab test that scientists can perform to diagnose tetanus. Upon hospital arrival, the child had jaw muscle spasms. He was alert and requested water, but was unable to open his mouth, and he was experiencing extreme respiratory distress. Doctors administered the DTaP vaccine for presumed tetanus. He was admitted to the pediatric intensive care unit and cared for in a darkened room with earplugs and minimal stimulation. The scalp laceration was irrigated and debrided. He was treated with multiple continuous intravenous medication infusions to control his pain and blood pressure, and with neuromuscular blockage medications to manage his muscle spasms. On hospital day 5, the doctors did a tracheostomy for prolonged ventilator support. On hospital day 35, the patient tolerated a 5-day lean-off from neuromuscular blockage medication. On day 44, his ventilator support was discontinued, and he tolerated sips of clear liquids. On day 47, he was transferred to the intermediate care unit. 3 days later, he walked 20 feet with assistance. On day 54, his tracheostomy was removed, and 3 days later, he was transferred to a rehabilitation center for 17 days. The boy required 57 days of inpatient acute care, including 47 days in the intensive care unit. The inpatient charges totaled to $811,929. 1 month after inpatient rehabilitation, he returned to all normal activities, including running and bicycling. Despite extensive review of the risks and benefits of tetanus vaccination by physicians, his family declined the second dose of DTaP and any other recommended immunizations. Clostridium tetani is typically found as spores in soil, dust, and animal feces. It is common to also be found in the human digestive tracts. The bacteria enters the body through an opened wound, whether that's a puncture wound, gunshot wound, a burn, or injection drugs. The bacteria typically leaves the body through feces after being filtered throughout the body. The first known cases of tetanus dates all the way back to the 5th century BC. In 1880, Katasato Shibasaburo isolated the tetanus bacteria. Antiserums were often produced in horses by doctors infecting the horse, draining their blood, and extracting the antibodies. In 1924, a vaccine was created. This vaccine is known as tetanus toxoid. Despite being developed in 1924, it wasn't commercially available for 14 more years. In 1948, there were about 600 cases being reported in the U.S., and in 2018, there were about 20 cases that were being reported. One can clearly see that there was a significant drop of tetanus cases after the vaccine was developed. In this slide, I've included a picture of one of the first tetanus toxoid vaccines, which is located at the National Museum of American History. Anyone is at risk for this disease. However, people who have not received any vaccinations, those who undergo medical treatments in unsanitary conditions, and those who are immune compromised are put at a higher risk. People who use needles on a regular basis, if that's for treatment of diabetes or for heroin users, and they are not taking the proper precautions, they are also increasing their chances of developing this disease. To the right, you can observe two babies that have developed neonatal tetanus that they have gotten due to unsanitary conditions at birth. This type of tetanus usually develops 3 to 10 days after birth and is passed on by the mother. A pregnant woman should get vaccinated before giving birth so that she is able to pass on the immunity to the baby. As previously mentioned, tetanus enters the body through a wound. Once in the body, the bacteria can come out of their protective spore coating since they are not present in an aerobic environment. They then reproduce asexually through binary fission. Once there's enough bacteria, they begin producing tetanospasmin, which is very toxic to the body. This toxin attacks the nerves and controls our muscles and causes muscle spasms. The following video will provide us with other information on how this bacteria attacks our bodies.
Tetanospasmin works by entering special inhibitory neurons called Renshaw cells. Once they get inside, tetanospasmin cleaves snare proteins, which are proteins that pull vesicles that are loaded with neurotransmitters to the neuron membrane. When the snare proteins are cleaved, it prevents the release of inhibitory neurotransmitters, like glycine and GABA. You can think of snare proteins as the rails, and the vesicles as trains that are loaded with neurotransmitters. The tetanospasmin destroys the rails so that the trains can't move. The role of Renshaw cells and inhibitory neurotransmitters is to fine-tune the action of the alpha motor neuron, which is in charge of sending the actual signal for contraction to the muscle. In tetanus, Renshaw cells fail to work, and the alpha motor neuron keeps firing without any inhibitory control, causing muscle rigidity and spasm.
It typically takes anywhere from 1 day to 1 month before symptoms of tetanus can develop. However, it's usually around 7 days for most people. In the case study that was mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, the 6-year-old boy showed symptoms in 6 days and required hospital care for 2.5 months. The duration of this disease varies depending on the severity of the tetanus. It should also be known that kids usually take longer to recover and can spend multiple weeks in the hospital recovering. Tetanus cannot be spread from person to person. It can only be contracted by direct transfer of Clostridium tetani spore from the environment and into a wound. To prevent the spread of this disease, which is totally achievable, people should receive the tetanus vaccines that have been developed. Children usually receive 5 doses of DTaP, one at 2 months, another at 4 months, 6 months, 18 months, and one when they turn 5. Other rounds of vaccines should be administered throughout the whole course of a person's life, just in case. TDAP is only for children 7 years and older, adolescents, and adults. Adults should receive a booster dose every 10 years or earlier in case of a severe and dirty wound or burn. They can also receive a booster, which can be either TDAP or TD if they experience a dirty wound at any point. The TD vaccine is good for about 10 years, and then they should look into receiving another dosage. Another way people can prevent tetanus from developing in their system is proper wound care. They should not delay in applying first aid and should wash their hands regularly and thoroughly. If you encounter tetanus, doctors should immediately administer tetanus immune globulin and debris the wound. A tetanus booster vaccine may also be delivered, as well as antibiotics and other medications that can control the muscle spasms. Depending on how extreme the infection is, patients could also be placed on a ventilator to help respiratory issues that may develop. The muscle spasms caused by this disease can be so strong that they have known to break bones. One can notice a huge decline of incident cases and deaths that are being recorded. The blue line represents the number of deaths per 100,000 people due to tetanus, and the orange line is the number of incident cases. As we move closer to the early 2000s, we can notice a declining rate of incidents with this disease. 56,743 cases were reported by the World Health Organization in 2015. They also reported that the most cases of tetanus originated from poor countries in Africa and Vietnam. There were about 30 cases of tetanus that were reported in 2015 for the United States, and only one case that was reported in Colorado. Since 2008, there have only been 3 confirmed cases of tetanus in Colorado. Now, as we look at the mortality rate of tetanus, we notice the graphs to the right. The top graph is the number of deaths from tetanus all over the world from 1980 to 2017. In 2017, there were 38,134 cases that had died from tetanus. But that is a better number than the over 300,000 cases that were reported in 1990 that had died from tetanus. In the United States, there are 3 cases found to be fatal in 2017. And in Colorado, I was unable to find a case of tetanus that was fatal. Scientists have tried to isolate Clostridium tetani, but have not been successful in producing very effective results. A group of doctors took wound samples from 80 patients who were clinically diagnosed with tetanus. The swabs were cultured anaerobically for screening C. tetani isolates using the biochemical tests. The biochemical examination of the culture in Mueller-Miller medium revealed the presence of anaerobic bacteria with characteristic gas production in 5 of the 80 culture tubes. Anaerobic plates were examined for the presence of swarming colonies, and those observed were subcultured and examined using gram staining. Out of 80 samples, only 5 samples, or 16% of the data group, were found to be positive for Clostridium tetani. A 16% chance of isolating the bacteria from a wound sample is not very good chances, and it could be too late if the doctors waited that long for these test results, which is why this method of testing is not used very often. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Here's a list of my references I used to create this presentation, and I appreciate any feedback or questions that you have for me. Thank you.